I'm 71 years old, and I need you to listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to say might change the way you look at your life. I'm not sharing that to be dramatic. I'm sharing it because I don't have the luxury of wasting words anymore. If I could go back and talk to my younger self, the version of me who thought he had all the time in the world, I would grab him by the shoulders and say this: you are running out of time, and you don't even know it. I'm 71 years old now. I've lived long enough to see that success fades, titles disappear, and achievements blur together. I know how that sounds. When you're young, time feels endless. Days drag on. Years feel slow. You tell yourself, I'll do it later, when things calm down. Later, when you're more stable. Later, when life finally makes sense. I believed that lie for most of my life. I told myself I was being responsible, that I was doing what I was supposed to do, working hard, providing, planning for the future. I thought discipline and sacrifice would eventually buy me peace. But here's the truth no one told me back then. Life doesn't slow down when you're ready for it. It speeds up. One day you're building a career, chasing goals, telling yourself you'll rest when you get there. And then you look in the mirror and the person staring back at you is older than you expected. I remember the moment it really hit me. I was standing in my kitchen early one morning, coffee in my hand, staring out the window. Nothing special was happening. No big event, no tragedy. Just a quiet realization that made my chest tighten. I had spent decades preparing for a life I was already living, and somehow I'd missed it. I had spent so much time planning for someday that I forgot to pay attention to today. I postponed joy. I delayed rest. I assumed the people I loved would always be there. And that's the most dangerous assumption of all, because time doesn't warn you when it's about to take something away. It doesn't send reminders. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just keeps moving. I used to think the biggest mistakes in life were the things you did wrong, the bad decisions, the wrong turns, the failures everyone could see. But at 71, I know better. The real regrets aren't loud. They're quiet. They're the phone calls you never made, the trips you kept postponing, the conversations you meant to have one day, the people you loved but never quite told how much they mattered. Those are the things that stay with you. And once you realize that, something changes. You stop asking, what should I be doing next? And you start asking, what am I waiting for? Because the truth is, none of us are guaranteed the time we think we have. And if I could give you one gift, just one, it would be this awareness before it's too late. The moment that changed everything didn't come with flashing lights or a dramatic collapse. It came quietly, the way most life-altering moments do. I was sitting in a doctor's office, listening as he spoke in that careful, measured tone doctors use when they don't want to scare you, but also don't want to lie. He was explaining test results, talking about stress, blood pressure, warning signs I'd ignored for years. At some point he stopped talking and just looked at me, and in that silence I understood what he wasn't saying. My body had been keeping score every late night, every skipped meal, every "I'll rest when this is over," every moment I chose work over people, productivity over presence. It had all added up. When I walked out of that office, I didn't feel afraid. I felt exposed, because for the first time I saw my life clearly, not as a series of plans or goals, but as a finite number of days already partially spent. That's a strange thing to feel at 71. You start doing math you never did before, not years ahead, but years left. And that's when the questions start getting louder. How many more mornings will I wake up feeling this way? How many more times will I get to see the people I love laugh across a table? How many ordinary days do I actually have left? No one prepares you for how quickly those questions arrive. What hit me hardest wasn't fear. It was regret. Not regret for failing, but regret for waiting. Waiting to slow down. Waiting to say no. Waiting to enjoy the life I was already living. I had spent decades preparing for a future that kept moving further away, like a mirage on the horizon. Every time I thought I was getting close, it shifted again. And then one morning I realized something devastatingly simple. There was no later coming to save me. If I wanted a different life, a fuller one, it had to begin now. Not next year, not after one more project, not after one more responsibility. Now. That realization was both terrifying and freeing. Terrifying, because it meant I could no longer hide behind excuses. Freeing because it meant I still had a choice. I started asking myself questions I'd avoided for decades. What actually matters to me? Who do I want to be present for while I still can? What am I doing purely out of habit, not meaning? And some of the answers were uncomfortable. I realized I had been busy, not fulfilled, productive, but disconnected, responsible, but not always present. I had confused motion with purpose. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That's when I began to understand something I wish someone had told me much earlier in life. Time doesn't change your priorities. Awareness does. And awareness has a way of arriving only when it's almost too late. Once that awareness settled in, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It followed me everywhere, into the grocery store, into conversations, into the quiet moments before sleep. I started noticing things I had rushed past for decades, the way the light came through the window in the late afternoon, the sound of laughter drifting from another room, the feeling of sitting still without needing to be somewhere else. For most of my life, stillness made me uncomfortable. Silence felt like wasted time. If I wasn't producing something, achieving something, moving towards something, I felt guilty. That's how deeply the idea had been planted in me that my worth was tied to how busy I was, so I began to question it. What if being busy wasn't the same as being useful? What if slowing down wasn't laziness, but awareness? What if the life I was chasing had been quietly happening around me the whole time? These weren't easy thoughts to sit with, because once you stop distracting yourself, you start noticing what you've been avoiding. I noticed how many conversations I'd half listened to, how many moments I'd rushed through because my mind was already on the next thing, how often I'd chosen efficiency over connection. And then came the hardest realization of all. Some of the most important moments of my life had already passed. Not because I wasn't there, but because I wasn't present. That realization hurt more than any diagnosis ever could. It's one thing to lose time to illness or bad luck. It's another to realize you gave it away willingly. I began to understand that time isn't just something that moves forward. It's something you either inhabit or abandon. Most of my life I had been living ahead of myself, planning, worrying, preparing, instead of actually being where my feet were. So I made a decision, a quiet one, not a dramatic vow, not a public declaration, just a choice. I decided that if I didn't have as much time left as I once thought, then I would stop postponing the things that made life feel real. I started calling people I'd been meaning to call someday. I started saying no to things that drained me, even when it felt uncomfortable. I started saying yes to moments that didn't look productive on paper, but felt meaningful in my chest. And something surprising happened. Life didn't fall apart. The world didn't punish me for slowing down. Nothing terrible happened when I stopped chasing every expectation. In fact, something beautiful began to take its place. Clarity. I began to understand that the problem wasn't that life was too short. The problem was that I had been living as if it were endless. And once you see that, to really see it, you can't go back to the way things were before. You start measuring your days differently, not by what you accomplished, but by what you felt. Not by what you earned, but by what you experienced. Not by how busy you were, but by how alive you felt while doing it. And that's when everything started to change. If you're listening to this right now, I want you to understand something very clearly. You are not too late. You still have time, but not as much as you think. And I don't say that to scare you. I say it because I wish someone had said it to me when I still believed I had forever. The truth is, most people don't change because they don't think they need to. They tell themselves, I'll do it someday. They assume clarity will arrive on its own. But clarity doesn't arrive. It's chosen. And it usually shows up disguised as discomfort. The moment you start questioning your routines, the moment you feel that quiet dissatisfaction you can't explain, the moment something inside you whispers, there has to be more than this. That voice isn't weakness. It's awareness, waking up. And here's the part I wish someone had been brave enough to tell me earlier. You don't need permission to live differently. You don't need a crisis. You don't need to hit rock bottom. You don't need to wait for everything to fall apart before you change direction. You can choose now. You can choose to call the people you've been meaning to call, to spend time where your heart feels full instead of where your calendar tells you to be, to stop postponing joy as if it's a reward you'll earn later, because later is never guaranteed. One day, without warning, life will quietly ask you a question. Did you use the time you were given? Not perfectly, not impressively, just honestly. And when that day comes, whether it's decades from now or sooner than you expect, I want you to be able to answer without regret. I want you to know that you showed up, that you loved fully, that you paid attention, that you didn't sleepwalk through the only life you'll ever get. I'm 71 years old now. I've lived long enough to see that success fades, titles disappear, and achievements blur together. But moments, real moments, stay with you. The sound of someone you love laughing, the feeling of being completely present, the quiet peace of knowing you didn't waste your time. That's what lasts. So if this message reaches you at the right moment, if something in you feels stirred or unsettled, don't ignore it. That's not fear. That's awareness knocking. And it's asking you a simple question. What are you going to do with the time you have left? Because the truth is, the clock is always ticking. And the best moment to start living fully is now. Subscribe, because I have more truths to share and not much time left.